We have Una joining, Una Kravitz. She is from the Web DevRel team. Hi, Una. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
You too.
Great. So I'm going to just pass it over to you, let you introduce yourself and also the panelists, but I'll hop off and everyone do get your questions ready. This is such a good opportunity. So thanks so much, Una. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. I'm also an NYC. So I am the CSS and Dev Tools lead, and I'm really excited to be here today to moderate this panel. It's a really nice end of year treat to get everyone together. But I do have an update. We were supposed to have Jake Archibald here as a moderator, but you've all been duped. Sorry about it. He couldn't make it here today. So you're all stuck with me. And I apologize about it, but maybe I'll try to throw in some bathroom humor to make Jake proud. So I'm excited. We do have some good news, and that is that we have some very smart people joining me on this panel. We have Paul Kinlan, who is all of our boss. He is the Web DevRel lead on this team. Phil Walton, who is the performance and navigation lead. Rowan Meerwood, who is the security, privacy, payments, and identity lead. We have Rachel Andrew, the web.dev and developer.chrome.com content lead, and Jason Miller, the web DevRel runtime performance developer advocate. So to everyone else tuning in, as Erica said, we are going to go through the questions that you've already asked when you RSVP'd. I'm going to start asking those questions to our panelists, but you can also ask live questions in the stage chat on the right, which I'll do my best to get to throughout the AMA. So if you have some follow-up questions or other questions that weren't brought up, feel free to ask in the stage chat. And I will get started with the questions that were already asked as you're RSVPing. I'm just going to get right into it because time is of the essence. So our first question, which I thought was a really interesting question, is, do I need to learn JavaScript to be a web expert? I think that we're missing some of our panelists here.
Well, I can start talking about this while we wait for Jason. I'm sort of fairly well known as a front end person, but I am not a JavaScript developer and never have been. I mean, I know my way around JavaScript, but I mostly have done on the front end HTML and CSS. I think it's important for anyone to have, on the web today, to have a foundational knowledge of JavaScript. But there are specialisms that mean you don't need to be a JavaScript expert. There's a real difference between a JavaScript developer and that being your main job and someone who works mainly on HTML and CSS but understands a bit of JavaScript. So I think if it's not your thing, you don't need to despair. It doesn't mean that you can't have a job on the web.
Right, for sure. Like if you think about for me, the word expert, I always think of like a T-shaped skill set. So you have the thing that you're deep on, it might be JavaScript or it might be HTML or CSS or accessibility or whatever. But like, in order to be an expert, you usually need to know the touch points that expert skill is going to have. And I think it would be difficult to be, an animations expert if you were not at least aware of like what is the JavaScript doing, what are people doing in JavaScript for animations, just so that when is something in your wheelhouse or not in your wheelhouse, or where would be a new skill set to acquire or something you don't need to bother with. But yeah, I don't think you need to necessarily be like a JavaScript expert in order to be able to build awesome things on the web.
Yeah, and a lot of people that ask this question, they're kind of asking, am I going to be a failure in this industry if I don't know JavaScript? And the answer to that is definitely no. Like there are many, many, many jobs. There are many people who are super successful that aren't JavaScript experts. And so like if that's your concern, the person asking this question, like I think it would be helpful to learn JavaScript, but you certainly don't need to know it to be successful in the industry.
I think also this question kind of lends to this perception that if you are a JavaScript expert, that automatically makes you a web expert. But that is one proponent of web technologies that build the platform. So I think that there's that perspective too of it's important to understand the underlying breadth of the web to be an expert in that field.
Yeah. Otherwise, you might risk, accidentally over-indexing stuff on JavaScript. If you know JavaScript amazingly well, but you're not super familiar with HTML and CSS, you might, again, to use an animation example, you might animate something in JavaScript without realizing like, oh, there's actually like a dedicated element.animate API to do exactly that thing. You need to remember that it's there.
Yeah, the right tools for the job.
Yeah.
So this really lends well into the next question, which is, if I want to improve my skills as a web developer, what resources can I use? Rachel, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. Over on web.dev, we've got some resources in our Learn section. We've been building up a collection of sort of foundational resources. We've got things like Learn CSS and Learn Design and Learn PWA. So that's somewhere. And then I would say that, MDN is a fantastic place to go to. The content there is looked over by, lots of subject matter experts and the community who are sort of making sure that stuff is right. And that's kind of a really good place to go if you want to learn sort of in depth about various parts of the platform. What I would say is, the web, there's so much that you could be learning. And even if you get in a room with people who are, web experts, there's going to be great chunks of the web they don't know that well. And so don't feel that you have to learn absolutely everything. Learn the kind of core things, learn HTML and CSS and a bit of JavaScript, and then figure out what it is that you really like doing and you're good at and you enjoy and the problems you need to solve, and then start to investigate those things. But, the learning is kind of a lifelong thing. I've been doing this over 20 years and I'm still enjoying learning new stuff about the web. So it can be fun too.
Nice. A follow-up to that, should I focus on fundamentals or new trends? Rowan, maybe you could speak to this one.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about, Jason mentioned the T-shaped people thing, which is it's a concept I love. I remember seeing that in the Valve handbook years ago. And I think one of the things about that T-shape is kind of choosing where you go deep on something. And the depth is where you want to pick one of those fundamentals that you work with on a regular basis. Because the nice thing about it being a fundamental is it's not going to change on a monthly basis. It's going to stay pretty solid for years at a time. So I think some of the things for me are HTTP headers and cookies, especially. I've been getting quite deep into those. And there's one, it's kind of nice because, you're reading stuff from 2003 and it's still relevant. But the other bit as well is if you learn that depth, you often find that it's if you're doing things the way the fundamentals want you to do them, you're going to save yourself a lot of time, not fighting against stuff by trying to do it a different way inside of a framework or at a higher layer, when there's an easier way to take care of it a bit lower down the stack.
Nice. So Rowan, while I have you on, we have a live question here there in the Q&A section. Vicky Lee asks, what are the biggest challenges you see in terms of web security at the moment?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff that comes up is it is just such a broad platform that we've tended to this thing on the web where we're kind of open by default, and it ends up being your responsibility as a web developer to lock down every single avenue where you might get attacked. And that's hard. That's a moving target to try and tackle. So we're doing some things on the web platform side to try and set more secure defaults so you don't have to worry about this stuff as much. But I think one of the things I'd say, rather than just launching into a big list of set this header, change this setting, we actually have a checklist up on web.dev that Rachel mentioned before. Can probably drop the link in there for you, but that will actually give you a kind of hey, run through your content security policy, run through cross-origin isolation, and we've got some nice defaults that you can just drop in, and it's going to get you 80% of the way there.
Nice.
Yeah, I kind of like that bit as well. What you were saying there is because I struggle with security. It's just so complex. You said it's so broad and everything, and we add new primitives to the platform. I can't talk to them today. And each one of those has its own kind of potential issues or risks and everything, kind of knowing what to do. And it's, oh, cool, I've actually got to put the correct HTTP header on the response so it gets passed. It's just complex. And I think sometimes, for me, it's just giving yourself enough time. That's probably the biggest challenge, to learn what you need to do and what to focus on, or even kind of bring someone in who might actually be a bit more of an expert in those spaces as well. So,
yeah. So this next question is a really fun one. Tell us about a Chrome feature we might not know about. I would love it if everyone kind of chimed in with a Chrome feature that's maybe lesser known, but could change how you interact on the browser with the browser.
I have one. Mine is silly, but So far, I'm like 10 for 10 on people not realizing this is a thing. Command Shift A, or I think Control Shift A in Chrome, is a like fuzzy finder style tab switcher that is built in that lists all of your tabs across all of your windows. You hit that, type a query, hit enter, and you are at that tab, even if it's on a different desktop.
Wow. +1 to did not know.
Yeah, did not know that one.
Yay. 11 for 11.
Wow, that's so useful because I'm always like clicking through my tabs
Yeah.
to find something.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right, who's next?
Yeah, speaking of command click, this isn't as good as Jason's, but one that I find myself doing almost every day. I think this works in many browsers actually. Is you can, in the same way that you can command click on a link to open it in a new tab, you can command click on the back and forward buttons. I often will go to a site and realize I wanted to go back, but I want both tabs open. And so I'll command click on the back button and it just opens it up in a new tab. I do that probably once an hour.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've got a DevTools one, which is fairly new. There's a CSS overview in the Chrome DevTools, which is just super cool because it tells you all sorts of stuff about the CSS on your site, which is actually quite difficult to do by just like looking at your style sheets. And things like, which colors you've used, so you can identify if you've used a color which is, not quite on brand. You've picked a slightly different color, for example, the font sizes you're using, unused CSS. So that's like just such a useful little tool there in DevTools to kind of get an idea of, particularly if you're working on a site that you've been working on for ages and there's lots of sort of, things have crept in. You can go and find them via that. So that's a favorite of mine.
Yeah, very handy.
Yeah, I was thinking about this one as well. I was going to say Command Shift T now that Jason's done Command Shift A. It's like, reopen a tab that you lost. They're very good. But the other bit is, for me, at least on Chrome and Android, is like the follow feeds stuff that's kind of coming through and starting to kind of get a little bit more visibility. It was kind of only in, I think, only available for the US, people in the US at the time, but you can enable it via Chrome flags. And I think that's great because like we're enabling people to kind of keep up to date with the content that they discover around the web. So it's a nice little feature for me.
Yeah, I was debating like pulling a DevTools one or like a UI one, but there's one UI one that I see. I don't think enough people use it, and it's actually using separate Chrome profiles for things. So like you can click a little face up the top or like Control Shift M will get this, but it's like I set up a different profile for everything. So like one for my work Google account, one for my personal Google account. But I also have like a profile that I just call clean, where I don't have any extensions in there or anything. Because the number of times like I open up incognito mode and like my testing is still a bit messed up because I've got extensions that are active in incognito mode. So it's like having a clean profile where I've got no autofill, no extensions, nothing that's going to like mess with the tests that I'm trying to do in there.
Guest mode is good for that as well.
So the one that I am thinking of is a DevTools one. So you have DevTools open. I use this all the time. I think it's super useful. But if you hit Command Shift P in DevTools, like in your text editor, you get a shortcut to navigate throughout DevTools. So you don't have to go looking for the right panel because sometimes things are hidden behind panels and tabs and panes, and it can be hard to find what you're looking for. So you could just hit Command Shift P, and then if you start typing kind of what you're looking for, like dark, for dark mode emulation, the different dark mode emulation options will pop up. Or AVIF, you could emulate a browser that doesn't support AVIF. So it's really handy feature, Command Shift P in DevTools, to quickly find kind of what you're looking for.
That as well, because I honestly do not know what panel most features are on, because I just use the command prompt for everything. You just like, I want to do something, just type it in and give it to me. Then people ask you like, oh, where can I find this? And you're like, I don't know, just like search for it.
Yeah. Okay, I think that was everyone. Those were some great Chrome little pro tips. I love that. I definitely learned something new. So speaking of new things, we did get a few different questions about Web3 and the topic of Web3. And so this question is, how is Chrome planning to adapt to Web3? Sorry. So first of all, I do want to say that on this topic, I feel like this topic gives a lot of people anxiety because they worry about, oh, this new overhaul of the web platform, and now I need to learn a completely new technology set to stay relevant. But it's not like that. I think it's really important to remind people that Web3 isn't a complete overhaul of the web platform. It's a change in how data and files are stored and shared. So the same considerations still apply in web applications: good UX, performance, privacy. The work that we do, these fundamentals, are still relevant whether you're making a client-side app or storing information on a blockchain. So when you see like news or tweets about Web3, it's important to remember that the fundamentals aren't changing. And the way that we're presenting information on the web platform is still very much relevant to how we're growing from here and building up.
There's some bits I wanted to throw in on that as well, because I think, as you know, there's obviously a lot of hype around Web3 in the same way that there was around Web 2.0. And a lot of the kind of like agencies who are more than happy to be kind of like, yeah, we added some rounded corners and shadows, so now it's Web 2.0. Like, there will be the same thing with Web 3. But I think some of those core ideas around things like decentralization, like the web is in a good position to deliver meaningfully on some of those ideas of just like the basic thing of like, you can serve the service behind your own URL. You can run your own identity system. Like all of these things where the web is inherently open, like, I think that's like a real benefit of it. And I think we have a lot of that kind of like, you can own these services yourself, like built into the underlying platform.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move on to the next question. This, I think, is a good question for Philip. How should I go about optimizing for web performance, and how can I be sure the changes are working for real users?
Yeah, this is a very broad question,
Yeah.
which is actually great because one of the things that people here probably heard about is the Web Vitals initiative, or the core Web Vitals metrics. And one of the reasons that we created this initiative was because web performance is such a broad topic, and it's very difficult. Like a lot of people, developers gave us feedback that it's just super difficult to stay up to date with all the new metrics and everything that's changing constantly. So if you are looking kind of just for the simplest set of things to care about, then I would point you in that direction. Web Vitals is a great place. If you go to web.dev/vitals, you can learn about just kind of a couple of metrics that can be useful. The second part of this question, though, is making sure the changes are working for real users. This is another key feature of this initiative. Everything about it is user-focused. All the metrics are centered around something that affects the user experience in some way. And so there's some great tips in there as well to make sure that you're measuring these metrics on real users, and so that the experiences that you're optimizing for are something that they actually kind of experience and feel.
Yeah, definitely a broad question. We do have resources for that too, right, Phil, where people can go and sort of test?
Yeah, we have lots of tools. If you want to know about how real users are experiencing your site, the best place I would point you to is the Chrome User Experience Report, which you don't have to have set up any kind of analytics on your site to kind of get some data on that. So you can, and actually one of the best ways to get data from the Chrome User Experience Report is through the new PageSpeed Insights tool. So if you just go to pagespeed.web.dev, you can type in any URL, and it will pop up both a set of real user metrics from the Chrome User Experience Report, as well as it'll run a Lighthouse audit of your page to give you some kind of diagnostic information or like tips on how to improve.
Nice. So a follow-up to this question, what are the main causes of poor web performance? Does anybody else want to jump in on this one?
I can grab this. So I want to give a specific list, but I feel like the real correct answer to this question is actually an accumulation of decisions that you or your team or the project team for a given website has made, right? Like, the end state where you are today is usually because of decisions that have been made along the way, which is not, a criticism of those decisions. Usually what it is like, you make decisions, you make trade-offs, revenue was more important there, or, there was this user experience thing that they needed to launch. But ultimately, at the end of the day, performance is kind of that thing that is maybe a little bit more difficult to track over time, and that eventually it may add up to a problem where there was not a problem before. In terms of like actual specific main causes of poor performance, from a high level, loading too much stuff up front. So if you're delivering a news website, like, an article on a news website, and you're sending down, 3/4 of what you're sending down is like custom fonts and JavaScript for carousels and sidebars and ads and whatnot. That's a lot of stuff that isn't the HTML for a news article that the user requested, right? Like, and the more stuff you put into that bucket of not the stuff that the user is waiting on, the longer it's going to take to actually get to the point where the browser can render that news article and the user can read the stuff. So especially stuff that's just not needed for the most important piece of the content being delivered, that is going to increase your perceived loading time, even though, you could change around the order of all the same stuff you're loading and have a different perceived loading time, even if it still takes the same 21 seconds or whatever to chew through all that JavaScript. And then in terms of something really specific, in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more people shipping icon sets in JavaScript files, importing SVGs, and their bundler bundles them into a big JavaScript file. That is disproportionately expensive because the JavaScript engine has to stream it all from the network into the JavaScript engine. It's got to parse and actually execute all that stuff as code. And then oftentimes it's got to get passed into a third-party library that renders it as DOM, and it's really expensive because it materializes all the nodes. It's the most expensive possible way that you can render icons. Super convenient. So I totally understand why people do it. I do it. But if you're looking for places to chip away at performance, investigating SVG spriting or external sprite sheets would be an excellent first place to start. You can use SVG symbols and they will get you almost exactly the inlining benefits you have today. It just takes a bit of compilation work.
Yeah, I love SVG use. That's really handy.
Actually,
so thank you for that rundown.
So there's actually one thing you said there as well, Jason, which was like convenience. And that was actually one of the things that it kind of made me think, where it was, it's obviously quite easy to fall into that pit of you have a performance problem. But I was also thinking about, like, sometimes there's not really a performance culture across, there might be a performance culture across the engineering team, but not across the company, the business that you're working in, because you quite frequently see kind of, I don't want to blame people in the marketing side of things, but it normally happens in there. But like they drop a new tag on the page, whether it's like an automatic mechanism, a tag manager, or like just a plugin like through WordPress or something similar, because they need it to measure those conversions. And it's really hard because people might not share the same values because they've got different priorities. And like if you can build that kind of culture about user experience, which I know Phil was talking about as well. Like, I think that's actually really something to build, and it's not a technical thing; it's a philosophy that people have to go by. And so, yeah.
Nice. So, while I have you up, Paul, is it possible to add a code editor in the browser? That was another question we got.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's loads, right? Like, I remember years ago, we should ship it. Yeah. There's vscode.dev, right? You can go on Github, press dot, and kind of away you go. There's lots of kind of, interesting things kind of happening in this space right now, but it's been going for a long time. Like, our former manager, Dion, before he kind of, he left, he left us, he was working on Bespin, right, with Mozilla and this kind of IDEs in the browser, and Cloud9's done it, before, they went to Amazon and everything. So there's a lot in this space. Glitch is another great place. It's a very simplified way of kind of, it's a full editor, but they've kind of streamlined it so you can just get stuff live straight away. And so I think there's a lot happening in that space, and it's kind of interesting to see. And yeah, Visual Studio Code's in the browser already. Go ahead, play, experiment, and ship. It's great.
It's a terrible plug, but for what it's worth, I do like 70% of my work in browser code editors right now.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily because they've gotten so good that they're competitive with desktop. That is the case, but it's actually because I can use a web-based code editor that is designed for the task I'm doing, right? I can use like a JS Fiddle or a CodePen or whatever if I want a rapid feedback loop. And that, to me, is actually better than a desktop editor where I'm thinking about files and structure and whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, also DevTools is a code editor. You can edit your code in DevTools directly. So I think it's there.
Yeah, I was gonna say that for like dev tools for stuff that I'm not like that good at, which is CSS most of the time. Like I go straight to DevTools for CSS because it just guides me along the way, and it's like if I put something together in there, I can see it working, and I'm reasonably sure like I haven't done something completely horrible with it because DevTools will let me know.
Oh, good. That means DevTools is working. Great to hear. So I think of this sort of a follow-up question. This is from the live questions from Aritra Saha. How can we contribute to Chromium?
Yeah, I think there's loads of ways, right? I think it depends on what you want to try and do. Like if it's code and actually like fix Chrome and Chromium, it's not easy. It's actually pretty hard. You have to kind of check out the source tree and know how to build and everything. But chromium.org has got all the updates about how to actually do that. And I think there's a nice community of engineers who are happy to help people get up to speed in that space. You know, one of the things that I did, like when I first started in Google on Chrome, you know, I just spent some time looking at the code base, trying to get things to build, trying to get stuff to work. I was actually pretty passionate at the time around Chrome extensions. And I was trying to work out like, how the heck do you find just like a good bug to work on that's not too complex, where you don't have to understand, you know, all the kind of the infrastructure. Like Chrome's infrastructure and architecture is like unbelievably complex, but there's areas that you can kind of start at, which is actually, it's pretty easy to fix. You know, I was fixing things in kind of the extension documentation first, right? And then I was kind of fixing kind of issues that, you know, the extensions team, they couldn't prioritize because they didn't have the time to, but it was just like stopping me as a developer advocate at the time, trying to just build something at that point. And it was like picking up all these little things. And then one of the things that I found was there's a hot list on crbug.com, which is the Chromium Bug Tracker, which gives you, there's a label, I think it's a label hot list. It's a hot list called Good First Bug. And that is the engineers kind of like prioritizing things for maybe new people joining the team, or things where it's just like, actually, it's not too hard to kind of get started in that space. And you can kind of look at those bugs. I'm not saying that like if you pick one, someone might already be working on it, so it's kind of hard, but it gives you kind of the place to start to look at what to do in terms of kind of how to fix the code. They shouldn't be too complex, and kind of you don't need a complete understanding of the architecture of Chrome. And also with the bugs, there's normally the email of the submitter, which is normally a Chromium engineer at that point, or so maybe as a Chromium engineer on the thread that you could probably ping an email. And there's quite a lot of people in Chromium who are actually quite happy to help people going through. That being said, I'm not saying go and spam everyone and just like things like, you know, try and get as far as you can on that side, but you know, there's a couple of different tactics that you can use to kind of just get started. And
could I just chip in there and just say that it's not just if you want sort of more wider contributions, there's all sorts of stuff you can do to help with the web platform. There's a really great site, wpc.guide, which basically tells you all the different ways to get involved with web platform. You know, that might be via working on standards or fixing bugs, all sorts of stuff. And that's a really good place to go if you just want to more generally get involved.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And it's not even necessarily code contributions. It also could be spec review and opinions and use cases. Finding use cases for proposed APIs is very helpful.
I wanted to say that about the repos. Like if you are looking at a new standard or, you know, a new proposal for a standard, or like origin trials, like the repos can be a little intimidating when you land on them, because they are written for a formal proposal for browser engineers. So often like you read the opening and it's kind of impenetrable because it's designed for someone who's going to implement the feature, not the web developer. But if you get past that and actually like raise an issue with like your use case, or how would I do X, like you're talking directly to the engineers who are going to be building it, or you're often talking directly to our team who are also on those repos and want to have that conversation with you, and want to help you get into that. So like definitely don't be put off by like spec language being kind of difficult to get into, because that's just going to stay the way it is, right? But there are actual human beings behind it who will help you.
Yeah, and I think, and generally people there's such a small number of people who actually contribute across the platform. And I think generally when someone turns up and is keen and interested and wants to learn, there's an awful lot of people who are going to be like, yay, a new person, great, and be very happy to help. And so I think, you can find all sorts of ways. I mean, I'm mainly a writer. There's loads of things need documentation, need writing work doing. So that's a good way to contribute and to get involved. You don't just have to be a browser engineer to become involved with the platform.
Yeah, I want to move on to the next question because we did get a lot of questions, both from the RCPs and also right now in the Q&A from folks who are students or starting out in the field. And so this is about interviewing. What do you look for when interviewing people for web jobs? Is it group projects, qualifications? What is it just generally? I think that a lot of us can sort of speak to this, but I don't know. Jason, do you want to kick this one off?
So I want to preface my answer with, you do not need to have a GitHub presence or projects to get a job, and that should never be a requirement to get a job. Having said that, if you're looking for ways to demonstrate skills that you have, and those skills don't have a qualification, or you don't have that qualification, like I don't have a university degree, GitHub can be one option for publicly demonstrating, like, oh, I know how to interact with the DOM because I maintain this DOM abstraction or whatever. Even whether or not it's something that's used, it's a place where somebody could go and notice, like, oh yeah, I know how to build that stuff.
Yeah, there was also some live questions. This one's from Manish Basnet about algorithms. Should one learn algorithms before learning languages?
I feel like that's like a follow-up.
Yeah.
No, definitely not. I think it would be confusing also to learn algorithms first, but I'm very bad at math, so that might be a biased answer. I will say one thing that I did things in the exact opposite order. I learned JavaScript and making buttons light up and have box shadows and whatnot first, and then went back and learned algorithms. And that way around was kind of fun, because if you already know a little bit of JavaScript and how to make websites and web UIs, you can visualize algorithms, and that's actually kind of a fun exercise. To me, a lot more fun way to learn algorithms. Like, oh, I want to do a sorting algorithm. Okay, well, render a bunch of boxes and then sort them and see if I can animate between the sorting states, because that's going to force you to have to write an async sorting algorithm, which is a interesting and unique exercise that you won't get from just pure algorithms exercises.
Nice.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of universities might kind of encourage you to learn algorithms first, and then the principles and everything before they kind of put you onto projects. But it's not what I did. I was just like, the very first program I built was to help my granddad pick his lottery numbers, right? And it was just kind of, I had like little problems and little things that I wanted to solve and automate. And then the algorithms come because you do find that they're useful, and it's useful to know when there's certain classes of problems and stuff. But you don't need it to start getting stuff done. Like my lottery number picking problem wasn't at scale; it was for one user, right? And so I didn't have to worry about a lot of stuff. And so
it was only later that you turned that into $1 billion business.
Yeah.
I think there's some good stuff here as well in the sort of this idea of like, work on a problem on your own, but recognize sort of how long is it productive for you to do that by yourself. Like, sure, you like go and tinker with the thing and try it out and get to a solution that works, but like only spend, I don't know, maybe like 2 hours doing that thing, and then sort of think to yourself, someone else has probably tried to do this before and may have shared a way of doing it. And that's sort of how I view like algorithms, is like, you need to get the problem in your head first, and then like someone will show you the algorithm and you'll be like, oh my God, that is so much simpler than my way of doing it. Like, I will use this in the future.
That's also a great way to learn too, is sort of progressively enhancing your code and improving it. But you have to understand why you're solving a certain way first before an algorithm could even make sense. So we are running low on time, and I do want to wrap this up with one last question. I think that this is a good question because we all probably have very different opinions on this, but it's also a great time to give CTAs. People can go to learn stuff. So what are the new and upcoming web technologies that folks should be excited about? So maybe give a technology and also where somebody can learn more about it.
I can go first. And I'm actually going to be a stand-in for Jake here, because Jake is MIA. I played around with this early on. He's source worker. No, he's currently kind of the person pushing it forward, I think. But shared element transitions is like a new kind of upcoming web API that lets you, similar to how mobile platforms work, it lets you basically define the DOM regions of your page that should stay in place or move or fade or whatever between full page reloads or client-side navigations. So you can kind of like, it's almost like you take a picture of the DOM and tell the browser how to cut it all up, and then it animates it to the next state, which doing all that stuff manually is extremely difficult, and across page load is not possible. The new shared element transitions API is a fairly elegant solution to that problem. So it excites me a lot. And it's a lot easier for browsers to optimize since it's all, compositing.
It's a very smooth experience. It looks awesome.
Yes.
When things kind of, you don't have that wait time. It's sort of like a perceived performance situation.
Yeah, actually related to that API, but kind of going at it from a different direction, is the new app history API, which I've been a little bit involved with and I really like. I think it's really promising. I mean, a lot of people, people love building SPAs these days, but they're actually quite complicated to do. Like history API is very easy to get wrong, and so a lot of people will reach for a framework or something to build their SPA because they don't trust that they're going to handle all the edge cases correctly. And so the app history API is a rethink essentially of the API based on kind of what we've learned from how people build SPAs. So if you just search for app history API on GitHub, you should find that. I think it might even be an origin trial right now, so you can play around with it.
And it works with the old history API or the current history API. So you could use it just to detect if it was a back versus a forward navigation, which is awesome.
Yeah, so I think I'll throw a CSS thing in because that's what I like to talk about. I'm really excited about the fact that we're going to get subgrid for grid layout in Chromium. That's kind of happening. The Microsoft team are working on that, and it's kind of part of the rendering ng project to sort of make rendering better in Chrome. So hopefully we'll have subgrid soon, which will let us inherit grid sizing down through sort of grandchildren elements rather than just being direct children. So I think that's going to unlock lots of useful patterns. There's lots of things that I know people want to do that I think are going to be sorted out by that.
I was
definitely.
Oh, boy, you want to
go on that?
I can go next if you want.
Go for it.
If you want to go, Ron. If you got a comment, Ron, you go. It's all right.
I was gonna do my thing, but I'll do my thing because you'll have an exciting ending, I think. So I'll put this one in. So like for me, I don't have one that's like a new feature, but I think it will make people's lives easier. We've got the reporting API, and we touched on this a little bit with like CSP. So the reporting API, like whenever something happens in the browser, like some kind of intervention or some feature is deprecated, Chrome can actually like send a report to the endpoint of your choice that will tell you like what that thing was, where it occurred, and give you that information. And so on the whole, it's like this is one of the mechanisms that I'm hopeful will like help us move things forward and clean up some of the craft that we have on the web, because we can start communicating things like deprecations, like changes, new restrictions that we want to make. We can give you that information in advance. And that's another one where we've got a link up on, I think it's on web.dev, might be on developer.chrome.com, but we can drop that in to get you prepared.
Yeah. It's actually a pretty good one, actually, Ron. I like that one. I think there's all the rest of them rubbish. Ron, yours are good.
Yeah. You can't practice, this one's not as exciting.
No. So what I've got I'm going to say is like, I actually was going to do, say, just Storage Foundation API, but then I saw Lars in the chat as well. I know Lars well, and he's saying Web Serial, which made me think, you know what, actually, it's not necessarily Web Serial, but like I really like where Fugu's going, which is the collection of advanced APIs. I know they're not necessarily cross-browser compatible, but I really like the idea of thinking about like, what do we open up to the rest of the ecosystem where they never thought the web was even a target that they could build for? right? Like if you never thought you could bring industrial hardware to a browser or whatever, like or control, well, you can now with things like serial access, USB access, and on all these. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's it. And so it's a long game. It's going to take a long time for these things to become ubiquitous. And I know the browser vendors have not always said that they're going to support these APIs, but I love the fact that we can open up new industries to come to the web and just enable more people to use stuff inside a browser without having to have anything super kind of complex installed. And if you were to go and ask Lars, who's in the chat, he'd also say we should focus on enterprise more. We probably should. So we'll do something in that space maybe in the future. So
yeah. So I guess I'll close it out. Something that I'm really excited about that's in the current editor's draft, but is in experimentation in Canary is container queries, which essentially let you query a parent selector to do style changes. So you could query a parent's size, so that would be the width or height, the inline or block size, or style of the parent. And this is a complete shift from what we currently have, which is media queries. Those are page-based, viewport-based. You can query information from a global layer. Container queries let you query more low-level information. So a parent of a child inside a container query, whether it's a card, you could style buttons. Like, this is just like a whole world of responsive styling that is shifting from the capabilities we have today. And that just changes everything. It lets you really do scoped styles within component-based design. So now, everything is component-based. Now you can actually have styling be aligned with that component and not have to rely on global information to make it work. So this is exciting. There's some great literature out there about this. You could check out the working group spec. Miriam Suzanne has done a lot of writing about it, is doing the majority of the spec development. I did a recent video series where I have some demos kind of going through how to build and when to use container queries. So if you are someone who builds interfaces, this is definitely something to not miss that is kind of coming down the pipeline that I think, along with Subgrid, changes the ecosystem for how we could really develop websites. And with that, any last final comments? We've run over time, so I already feel bad.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I've been trying to reply to the comments and questions, and it didn't work. So I do want to work out how we can kind of answer some of these questions that have come through, because there's a lot of really cool things that I think we can answer, but it's technically hard to do right now.
I think that we're actually going to collect the questions in the Q&A and answer them after the event. So
Brilliant.
If you didn't get your question in, get your question in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer it. All right. I think that's all that we have for you today. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. This has been really fun.